There are new bombshell claims today from royal insiders who say King Charles's cancer is incurable and he will likely die with the disease.
This is also a time of change for my family. Catherine becomes Queen Consort. In recognition of her own loyal public service, I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely.
The silence around King Charles III's health has become more than a private family matter. It has started to raise a much larger question about duty, succession, and the future of the British royal family. And now, with Prince William, the Prince of Wales, appearing more central than ever, many are asking whether the monarchy is quietly preparing for a moment no one wanted to face. 4 months, Buckingham Palace has worked carefully to project an image of calm continuity around King Charles III. Public statements have remained measured, appearances have been handled with precision, and every visible moment has seemed designed to reassure the nation that the monarch remains committed to his duties despite his ongoing health struggles. That message has mattered deeply, because in a monarchy, stability is never just a mood. It is part of the institution itself. The crown survives by making uncertainty look manageable, by presenting duty as stronger than fear, and by reminding the public that even in difficult times, the work continues. But behind that polished public image, reports suggest a more complicated picture may be unfolding. According to royal commentators, recent discussions inside royal circles have carried a different kind of weight, one that goes beyond ordinary scheduling or routine adjustments. The concern is not simply whether the king can attend a ceremony, receive a prime minister, or appear at a national event. The deeper question is whether the demands placed upon the sovereign are becoming heavier than anyone inside the palace is willing to admit publicly. And that is where Prince William enters the story in a way that feels impossible to ignore. The Prince of Wales has always known that his life was moving toward the throne. That reality has shaped his childhood, his public image, his marriage, his fatherhood, and his understanding of service. But there is a profound difference between preparing for a responsibility that belongs to the future and suddenly being drawn closer to decisions that feel much more immediate. Some observers believe William's role is no longer just about representing the next generation of monarchy. It may now be about helping steady the institution during one of the most sensitive periods of his father's reign. What makes this moment so emotionally difficult is that it sits at the intersection of family and duty. On one side, there is a son watching his father endure a deeply personal health battle. On the other, there is a future king who understands that the monarchy cannot afford confusion, hesitation, or public disorder. Those two roles do not always fit together neatly. A son may want privacy, patience, and time. An heir must think about continuity, responsibility, and the confidence of the nation. And when those worlds collide, the pressure becomes almost impossible to measure from the outside. This is why the public reaction has been so intense. People are not only watching King Charles III, they are watching Prince William for signs of what may come next. Every appearance, every expression, every slight change in tone is being examined through the lens of succession. Was his increased visibility simply part of ordinary royal duty, or does it suggest that the palace is quietly preparing him for a heavier role sooner than expected? Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed such claims, and it would be wrong to treat speculation as fact. But the questions themselves reveal how fragile public confidence can become when health, secrecy, and royal transition begin to overlap. For older royal watchers especially, this story carries echoes of history. The monarchy has lived through abdication, grief, scandal, war, modernization, and the long reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Each generation has faced its own test, but this moment feels particularly delicate because King Charles waited longer than any previous monarch in British history to begin his reign. His accession was supposed to represent continuity after a historic loss. Instead, his early years as sovereign have been marked by personal illness, public concern, and renewed questions about how much responsibility the modern monarchy can place on one person. That is not a criticism of the king. If anything, reports of his determination have strengthened the image of a monarch deeply committed to service. Many supporters see his continued work as a sign of courage and discipline. They believe his visible presence reassures the country and demonstrates that the crown does not retreat when life becomes difficult. But others have quietly raised a more uncomfortable point. At what stage does dedication become a burden too heavy to carry? And who inside the institution has the authority or the emotional distance to tell a monarch that his health must come before duty? This is the first layer of conflict in the story. It is not a dramatic palace battle in the cheap sense. It is something more human and more consequential. It is the tension between a king determined to serve, advisors who may be worried about protecting him, and an heir who must support his father while preparing for every possible outcome. In ordinary families, health struggles are painful enough. In the royal family, they become matters of national symbolism. A cancelled engagement can spark headlines. A reduced schedule can create speculation. A careful statement can be read as reassurance by some and alarm by others. Catherine, Princess of Wales, also stands in the background of this wider conversation, not because she is at the center of the king's health situation, but because her own return to public life has reminded people that the Wales family is carrying multiple pressures at once. Prince William is not only the heir to the throne, he is also a husband, a father, and a senior royal trying to preserve normality for his children while the world watches his family through a magnifying glass. That balance between public duty and private protection has always defined him, but now it appears more important than ever. And perhaps that is why the story has captured so much attention. It is not only about medical updates, royal schedules, or palace statements. It is about what happens when the institution built on continuity is forced to confront uncertainty in real time. It is about whether the monarchy can prepare for the future without appearing to lose confidence in the present. It is about whether Prince William can step forward without seeming to step around his father. And it is about whether King Charles III can continue to embody duty while also accepting the limits that any human being, even a monarch, must face. For now, the official image remains one of steadiness. The king continues his responsibilities where possible, the Prince of Wales continues to support both his family and the crown, and the palace continues to manage the message with extraordinary care. But beneath that public calm, a more sensitive question is beginning to form. Was this simply a difficult chapter in a reign still finding its rhythm, or was it the first sign of a deeper shift inside the House of Windsor? Because to understand why Prince William's position now feels so important, we have to look beyond one appearance, one report, or one moment of concern. We have to look at what the palace may be preparing for behind the scenes, and why the future of the monarchy may already be moving closer than anyone expected. That is where the story begins to move beyond public appearances and into the quieter machinery of monarchy itself, because the question surrounding Prince William is no longer only about whether he is supporting his father. It is about whether the Prince of Wales is being drawn into a more active role at a moment when the palace cannot afford uncertainty, confusion, or even the appearance of hesitation. In ordinary times, this kind of gradual increase in responsibility would be treated as a natural part of royal life. The heir attends more engagements, takes on more patronages, represents the crown at more national moments, and slowly becomes familiar to the public as the person who will one day lead the institution. That process is usually careful, almost invisible, because the monarchy depends on continuity rather than surprise. It does not like sudden changes. It does not like open questions about authority. And it certainly does not like the impression that the future is arriving before the present is ready to release it. But this moment feels different to many royal watchers because the pace appears to have changed. Reports suggest William's involvement has become more significant not simply in public-facing duties, but in the wider conversations about how the royal household prepares for the months and years ahead. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the details of any private planning, and it would be wrong to treat speculation as fact. Yet the broader pattern has raised serious questions. Is this simply the normal development of an heir growing into his role, or is the monarchy quietly adjusting to a more urgent reality? That distinction matters because royal power is rarely expressed in dramatic announcements. It often appears through small shifts in visibility, responsibility, and access. A senior royal appears at an event once handled by the monarch. A statement is issued with carefully chosen wording. A future king becomes more central to national ceremonies. None of these moments alone proves anything. But when they begin to gather together, they create a new picture, and that picture can feel more revealing than any official confirmation. For Prince William, The pressure is unusually delicate. He cannot appear too eager to step forward, because that would seem insensitive while King Charles is still carrying the crown with determination. But he also cannot appear distant, because the institution needs the public to believe the future is secure. That balance is one of the most difficult roles an heir can perform. He must be visible enough to reassure, restrained enough to respect his father, and prepared enough to signal that the monarchy will not be shaken by whatever comes next. This is where the emotional weight of the story deepens. William's position is not simply strategic, it is personal. Every public step he takes during this period exists alongside a private reality that most families would handle behind closed doors. The king is not only the sovereign, he is William's father. And when a father's health becomes a national conversation, the normal boundaries between family concern and public duty begin to disappear. How does a son protect his own emotions when the nation is watching for clues? How does a future king prepare for responsibility without making that preparation look like a transfer of power? Some royal commentators believe this is the hidden difficulty behind the current mood inside the royal household. The monarchy must continue to look stable, but stability itself now requires more people to share the visible burden. That means more senior royals stepping forward, more careful coordination between households, and more attention on how every appearance is interpreted. A simple royal engagement can no longer be viewed only as a diary commitment. It becomes a message. It tells the public who is available, who is trusted, who is being positioned, and who may be needed if circumstances change. This is why Catherine, Princess of Wales, remains an important part of the wider atmosphere, even when she is not the focus of the story. Her own experience with health and public absence has reminded the country that the modern royal family is operating with fewer working members than in previous generations. The monarchy has slimmed itself down, but a smaller institution has less room for strain. When one senior figure steps back, the pressure travels quickly to others. When two or more are facing difficult chapters at the same time, the entire system has to adjust. That is one of the larger implications many viewers may sense beneath the surface. The issue is not only King Charles's health or William's future. It is whether the current royal structure is strong enough to absorb multiple pressures at once. For years, the idea of a streamlined monarchy was presented as modern, efficient, and necessary. But difficult moments test efficiency in ways ordinary times do not. A smaller working family may look disciplined when everything is calm, but when illness, public scrutiny, and institutional responsibility collide, the limits of that model become harder to ignore. And this is where the story begins to affect more than the immediate family. Charities, military associations, Commonwealth connections, national ceremonies, and local communities all depend on royal presence in different ways. Royal duties are not just photographs and handshakes. They are symbols of recognition. They tell people that their work matters, that their service is noticed, and that the crown remains connected to everyday life. When schedules change or responsibilities are redistributed, those choices carry meaning far beyond palace walls. At the same time, the palace must think carefully about public perception. If William appears too central, speculation about succession grows. If he appears too quiet, questions emerge about whether the monarchy is prepared. If the king continues a demanding schedule, supporters praise his dedication, but others worry about the strain. If duties are reduced, the public may read caution as concern. Every possible path creates its own interpretation, and that is what makes the situation so difficult to manage. The royal household understands this better than anyone. It has survived for centuries by controlling rhythm, symbolism, and timing. But in the modern media world, control is harder than ever. A photograph can be studied for hours. A missed appearance can spark days of debate. A small change in wording can become the basis for sweeping theories. The monarchy still speaks in tradition, but the public now responds in real time, and that changes the pressure on every decision. For William, this means his future role is being watched before it has fully arrived. People are not merely asking what kind of king he may be one day. They are asking how he behaves under strain now. Does he project steadiness? Does he protect his family? Does he show loyalty to his father while quietly accepting greater responsibility? These are not casual questions. They shape the early public understanding of his leadership long before the crown is ever placed upon him. Yet the deeper issue is not whether William is ready in a formal sense. He has spent his entire life being prepared for the monarchy. The more sensitive question is whether anyone can ever be emotionally ready for the future to move closer because of a parent's illness. That is what gives the story its human force. Behind the palace language of continuity and duty is a family confronting uncertainty, and behind that family is an institution that must never appear uncertain at all. This is why Section 2 of the story cannot be reduced to one report or one appearance. The meaning lies in the pattern, the increased attention on William, the careful silence from Buckingham Palace, the renewed focus on royal workload, and the growing sense that the future of the monarchy is being quietly tested. None of this proves a final outcome. But it does suggest that the palace is operating in a more sensitive environment than it is willing to publicly describe. And once that possibility enters the conversation, the story moves into far more delicate territory because the next question is not simply whether Prince William is stepping forward. It is who else inside the royal family may be affected if the balance of responsibility begins to change. And that is where the circle of pressure begins to widen, because a change in William's responsibilities would never affect William alone. In a monarchy built on hierarchy, symbolism, and carefully balanced public roles, one shift at the center sends movement through the entire royal household. If the heir becomes more visible, others must decide whether to step forward, step back, or quietly accept that the future is already reorganizing itself around him. This is why the attention has not remained only on the Prince of Wales. It has also turned toward Queen Camilla, Princess, and the Princess Royal, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, and the wider group of working royals who help keep the public face of the monarchy intact. Each of them carries a different kind of responsibility, but in a moment of uncertainty, those responsibilities become connected. A garden party, a military ceremony, a hospital visit, or a Commonwealth reception may seem separate on the calendar, yet together they form the living rhythm of the crown. If one part of that rhythm weakens, the others must quietly compensate. Queen Camilla's position is especially delicate. As the king's wife, she stands closest to the personal reality of his health, but as queen, she also carries public expectations of steadiness, dignity, and reassurance. Reports suggest she has continued to support Charles while maintaining her own duties, but that role is not simple. A consort must be visible enough to represent continuity, but not so visible that the public begins to wonder whether she is filling a space the monarch can no longer occupy. That is a difficult line to walk, and it places Camilla in a position where almost every appearance can be read in more than one way. Princess Anne's role raises a different question. The Princess Royal has long been seen as one of the hardest working members of the family, respected for her discipline, directness, and loyalty to the institution. She represents a style of royal service that is less theatrical and more practical, the kind that older royal watchers often associate with duty rather than celebrity. But if the royal workload continues to stretch across fewer shoulders, how much more can even the most reliable figures be expected to carry? And does the palace risk depending too heavily on those who have already given decades of service? That is the hidden tension inside the modern monarchy. The institution needs experienced figures, but it also needs generational renewal. It needs the reassuring presence of those who served under Queen Elizabeth II, but it also needs to prepare the public for William's eventual reign. These two needs are not enemies, but they can pull in different directions. The old guard provides trust. The new generation provides the future. And in a period shaped by health concerns, public scrutiny, and reduced numbers of working royals, the question becomes whether the palace can balance both without exposing the strain beneath the surface. This is where the absence of Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, continues to hover over the wider conversation, even when they are not directly involved. Their departure from senior royal duties changed the structure of the monarchy in ways that are still being felt. It removed two younger, globally recognized figures from the working royal roster and placed even more emphasis on William and Catherine as the future-facing branch of the institution. Some observers believe this has made the monarchy clearer and more focused. Others argue it has made the system more vulnerable when unexpected pressures arise. The palace would never publicly frame the situation in such blunt terms, but the practical reality is difficult to ignore. A smaller royal family has fewer options. It can look elegant and controlled when every senior figure is healthy, available, and aligned. But when the king is managing health concerns, Catherine is returning carefully to public life, and William is balancing fatherhood with an increasingly central role. The advantages of a slimmed-down monarchy begin to look more complicated. Efficiency can quickly become fragility when the institution has no surplus capacity. And this is why Section 3 of the story begins to feel less like a family drama and more like an institutional test. The monarchy is not simply asking who can attend which event. It is asking how the public should understand authority during a period of uncertainty. If William takes on more, does that reassure the country or accelerate succession speculation? If Camilla appears more often, does it comfort the public or intensify concern about the king? If Anne and the Edinburghs carry more engagements, does it prove the strength of the wider family or reveal how thin the working roster has become? These are not easy questions, because royal symbolism rarely has only one meaning. A gesture meant to calm the public can create new discussion. A schedule designed to protect the monarch can be interpreted as a warning sign. A visible heir can appear both responsible and uncomfortably close to transition. This is the paradox Buckingham Palace may now be facing. Every effort to project stability can also remind people why stability is being protected so carefully. Historical memory makes that even more sensitive. The British monarchy has always understood that transitions are not only constitutional events, they are emotional events. The public does not simply accept a new balance overnight. It must be prepared through familiarity, confidence, and trust. Queen Elizabeth II's long reign created an unusually deep sense of continuity, and Charles's reign began under the shadow of that immense legacy. Now, if reports of heightened internal planning are accurate, the palace may be trying to protect not only the king's well-being, but also the emotional readiness of a nation still adjusting to life after Elizabeth. For William, that means every step forward is loaded with meaning. He is not just a senior royal doing more work. He is the living symbol of what comes next. His presence tells the public that the line of succession is secure, but it also reminds them that one day the crown will pass again. That is why the palace must handle his visibility with such care. Too little, and the future feels distant and uncertain. Too much, and the future begins to feel uncomfortably immediate. But even that does not explain the most sensitive part of the story, because if the responsibilities around the king are quietly being redistributed, then the real question is no longer only who is helping now. It is whether someone inside the palace already understands that the monarchy may be entering a turning point before the public is ready to call it one. That possibility changes the entire tone of a story, because once the palace begins to think in terms of readiness rather than routine, every decision takes on a sharper meaning. A royal diary is no longer just a list of engagements. A public appearance is no longer just a gesture of reassurance. Even silence begins to function like a message, carefully controlled, carefully measured, and carefully protected from saying too much. According to reports, the most sensitive conversations now appear to revolve around how the monarchy can maintain confidence without creating alarm. That is a far more difficult task than it may sound. If Buckingham Palace says too little, speculation grows in the empty space. If it says too much, the public may begin to wonder why such detail is necessary. And if the palace adjusts the king's workload too visibly, even for sensible health reasons, that adjustment can quickly be interpreted as something larger than it was intended to be. This is where the pressure begins to move from private concern into public meaning. King Charles III may still be determined to fulfill his responsibilities, and many supporters admire that determination deeply. But determination alone does not remove the practical demands of the crown. The monarchy is not a symbolic office only. It is a living institution with constitutional duties, ceremonial obligations, international relationships, charitable commitments, and national moments that require consistency. When the monarch is facing health struggles, even ordinary planning becomes emotionally loaded because every change must protect both the person and the position. And that may be the turning point in this story. The palace is not simply managing the king's schedule. It may be managing the public's emotional readiness. That is a very different kind of responsibility. It means preparing people for the possibility of visible change without making them feel the institution itself is unstable. It means allowing Prince William to appear increasingly steady without making his father look diminished. It means supporting Charles's dignity while quietly ensuring that the machinery of monarchy can continue if circumstances become more difficult. For William, that creates a role far more complicated than ordinary royal duty. The future king must now embody reassurance without appearing to claim authority. He must stand close enough to the center to calm the country, but not so close that his presence feels like a signal of replacement. That is an almost impossible balance, and royal commentators have begun to examine whether his recent visibility is being shaped not only by duty, but by a deeper institutional calculation. But was this simply a response to one difficult period, or was it part of a wider shift in how the royal family is preparing the public for William's eventual leadership? That question matters because monarchy depends on familiarity. The British public does not suddenly meet a new king on the day he inherits the throne. They are slowly introduced to him over many years through public service, national ceremonies, family moments, and moments of crisis. In that sense, William's conduct now may become part of how his future reign is judged later. The comparison with Charles is unavoidable. For decades, Charles was the waiting heir, watched, criticized, examined, and slowly understood by the public long before he became king. William's path is different. He is widely viewed through the lens of Diana's son, Catherine's husband, a protective father, and the modern face of the monarchy's future. His image has been built around steadiness, restraint, and family-centered duty. But a health crisis inside the royal household forces that image to mature quickly. It asks him not merely to represent promise, but to demonstrate resilience under pressure. This is where the emotional stakes become more serious. If William steps forward too quietly, the public may not understand the scale of what is being prepared. If he steps forward too strongly, the symbolism may become uncomfortable. And if the palace misjudges the timing, the story could shift from reassurance to suspicion. That is the danger of a royal transition atmosphere, even when no formal transition has been announced. People begin reading movement where the palace once come. They begin seeing patterns where officials may prefer privacy. They begin asking whether the future is being prepared because it is wise to prepare, or because someone knows more than the public has been told. Queen Camilla's role also becomes more exposed in this stage of the story. Her continued public presence may be intended to provide steadiness beside the king, but it also reminds viewers that the monarch's personal support system is now part of the national conversation. Every consort in a difficult reign must carry a kind of silent burden, offering strength without drawing attention away from the sovereign. For Camilla, that burden is especially sensitive because public opinion around her has always been complex. In moments of calm, she can be seen as supportive and settled. In moments of uncertainty, her role becomes more closely scrutinized. Princess and the other working royals face their own kind of pressure. They may not be at the center of succession, but they are part of a structure that keeps the monarchy visible. If more duties are shared among them, the public may see unity in service. But observers may also ask whether that shared workload reflects strength or strain. This is the problem with royal symbolism. The same image can reassure one viewer and worry another. A full balcony can look like continuity. A redistributed diary can look like preparation. A reduced appearance can look like care, or it can look like concern. And the palace knows that perception can become reality if it is allowed to grow unchecked. Once the public begins to believe the monarchy is entering a more fragile phase, every future decision is interpreted through that belief. A normal adjustment becomes evidence. A private absence becomes a theory. A careful statement becomes a clue. That is why the institution must move with extraordinary discipline now. It is not only protecting the king's health, it is protecting the meaning of his reign. Some royal watchers believe this may explain the unusually careful tone surrounding recent developments. The message must be strong enough to reassure, but not so strong that it appears defensive. It must acknowledge the king's continued service without ignoring the human reality of his condition. It must allow William to become more visible without suggesting the crown is already shifting toward him. In other words, the palace is trying to prepare for the future while still honoring the present, and that is one of the most delicate calculations any monarchy can make. The strongest implication is not that a dramatic change has been confirmed. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the private details behind these reported concerns, and speculation must remain speculation. The real implication is more subtle and perhaps more powerful. The monarchy, may now be operating in a period where preparation itself has become part of the story. The public may not know exactly what is being discussed behind closed doors, but they can sense that the atmosphere has changed. And once that atmosphere changes, the story cannot return to what it was before. Prince William's role is watched more closely. King Charles's appearances carry greater emotional weight. Camilla's presence becomes more symbolic, and reliability becomes more important. The working royals are no longer simply supporting the institution, they may be helping shield it from uncertainty at one of the most vulnerable moments of the modern reign. That is why this chapter feels so consequential. It is not only about whether the king continues his duties, or whether William takes on more responsibility. It is about whether the public is witnessing the early outline of a new royal balance before anyone inside the palace is ready to name it. And that is where the final part of the story becomes impossible to ignore, because the real consequence is not only what may be happening now. It is what this moment reveals about the future of the monarchy itself. What this moment reveals, then, is not simply a question of schedules, titles, or who appears where on behalf of the crown. It reveals something far deeper about the modern monarchy itself, an institution trying to protect continuity while quietly acknowledging that continuity can no longer be taken for granted in the same way it once was. For much of the late Queen's reign, stability felt almost automatic. Queen Elizabeth II was not only the sovereign, she was the emotional architecture of the institution. Her presence gave the monarchy a sense of permanence that survived political change, family difficulty, public criticism, and national uncertainty. But after her passing, the House of Windsor entered a new era, one where every symbol had to be rebuilt around a different monarch, a different generation, and a public far less willing to accept silence without question. That is why the current situation surrounding King Charles III carries such weight. It is not only about whether the king continues to appear in public or how many duties he carries in a given week. It is about whether the monarchy can preserve the feeling of steadiness when the people at the heart of it are visibly human, vulnerable, and under pressure. For generations, the crown has been presented as something larger than the individual. Yet moments like this remind the public that the crown is still carried by individuals, with bodies that tire, families that worry, and limits that tradition cannot erase. In that sense, Charles's reign may be defined not only by what he does as king, but by how the institution adapts around him. Reports suggest he remains deeply committed to service, and that determination has become an important part of his public image. But a reign is not judged only by endurance. It is also judged by judgment, timing, and the ability to prepare wisely for what comes next. If the palace is now thinking more carefully about workload, visibility, and the role of the heir, that does not necessarily signal panic. It may signal realism, and realism may be exactly what the monarchy now needs. The older model of royal duty often depended on the idea that service meant continuing no matter the personal cost. That image inspired respect, especially among generations who admired sacrifice, restraint, and discipline. But the modern public also understands health, family, and emotional well-being in ways previous generations did not always discuss openly. That creates a new expectation. People may admire a monarch who keeps working through difficulty, but they may also respect one who allows others to help carry the burden. This is where Prince William's role becomes historically significant. If the Prince of Wales is being positioned more visibly, even gradually, then the public may be watching the early formation of a different style of monarchy. Not a sudden break from the past, and not a rejection of his father's reign, but a slow rebalancing of responsibility between the sovereign and the heir. The question is whether that rebalancing can happen without making the present look fragile or the future look impatient. William's challenge is to represent continuity without appearing to hurry history. That is a delicate responsibility because the monarchy cannot afford the impression of rivalry between generations. The future king must support the king, not overshadow him. He must reassure the public, not alarm them. He must be prepared, but not perform preparation too loudly. And if royal watchers are right that his role is becoming more central, then the next chapter of the monarchy may depend on how carefully that visibility is managed. Catherine's place in this future also carries quiet importance. Her public image has long been tied to calm, family, and emotional steadiness, But recent years have shown that even the most carefully protected royal figures can become part of a wider national conversation about privacy, resilience, and expectation. As William's role grows, her position beside him will matter more, not because she must dominate the story, but because the monarchy's future image will increasingly be built around the Wales family as a symbol of continuity, parenthood, and generational trust. Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, and the remaining working royals also remain essential to the final meaning of the story. If the institution is entering a more demanding period, then it will need not only future symbolism, but present reliability. Camilla's support, and discipline, and the steady work of other senior royals may help prevent the monarchy from appearing overly dependent on one figure. That balance matters, because the crown's strength has always come from both hierarchy and teamwork. One person may wear the crown, but the institution survives through the coordinated service of many. The public, however, will continue to watch for signs. That is the reality Buckingham Palace cannot fully control. Viewers will study appearances, listen closely to statements, and ask what each adjustment means. Some will see careful planning and be reassured. Others will see the same planning and wonder what has not been said. Neither reaction can be dismissed because both come from the same place, a desire to understand whether the monarchy remains secure during a period of visible change. Perhaps that is the deepest truth of the story. The reported concerns around the king, the growing attention on William, and the quiet calculations inside the royal household all point toward one larger transformation. The monarchy is no longer simply asking how to preserve tradition. It is asking how tradition survives when the public expects honesty, when health can no longer be hidden behind ceremony, and when succession must be prepared without being openly announced. So the final meaning is not that one dramatic conclusion has been confirmed. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the private details behind many of these reports, and speculation should remain carefully separated from fact. But what can be seen is the atmosphere, more watchful, more sensitive, and more focused on the future than before. The royal family appears to be entering a phase where every decision carries both personal meaning and institutional consequence. So what do you think? Was this simply one difficult royal chapter, or does it point to a much larger shift inside the monarchy? Is Prince William only supporting his father through a painful period, or is the future of the crown already beginning to take shape in front of the public? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary-style royal story. Because in the House of Windsor, the most important changes are not always announced. Sometimes, they are quietly revealed through the way a family chooses to carry the weight of history.